Title: The Cross and the Crown. The True Tale of Godfrey of Bouillon. In the twilight of the 11th century, when Europe was shaped by faith, war, and legends, one man would rise not as a king, but as a protector. This is the story of Godfrey of Bouillon, a man of steel and prayer, whose life became entwined with the greatest religious quest of the Middle Ages, the First Crusade. In this story, we explore his childhood, his motives, the great journey to the Holy Land, the battles he endured, and the humility that defined his legacy. He was taught both Latin and the art of war, learning from clerics and knights alike. He observed diplomacy at his father's court and trained in the brutal rhythms of mounted combat. He also learned to hunt and ride with the seasoned men of his father's retinue, developing strength and endurance that would later see him through impossible campaigns. As he grew, he carried with him a sense of destiny, not of personal glory, but of sacred purpose. Chapter 2. The Quiet Rise. Unlike many medieval warriors who sought glory through brashness, Godfrey's early years were marked by loyalty and measured courage. He served Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, with distinction during the German campaigns in Italy. For this loyalty, he was granted the Duchy of Lower Lorraine, a strategic land that placed him at the crossroads of Europe. Though the title of Duke was prestigious, it was constantly challenged. Godfrey had to defend his land against jealous rivals and rebellious vassals. Through diplomacy and discipline, he forged respect without spilling more blood than necessary. His tenure was not without hardship. The Church was in conflict with the Holy Roman Emperor in the investiture controversy, and Godfrey found himself navigating not just battlefields, but ideological rifts within Christianity. Despite these tensions, he maintained a careful balance, never forsaking his duties as both warrior and Christian. His court became known for fairness and discipline, and he earned the loyalty of soldiers who would later follow him to the edge of the known world. Chapter 3. The Call from the East. In 1095, Pope Urban II summoned the princes of Europe to Clermont in France. His speech, fiery and full of spiritual weight, called upon the faithful to take up the cross and liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule. The Holy Land, sacred to Christians, Jews, and Muslims, had seen centuries of conflict. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I had asked for help against the Seljuk Turks, and the Pope turned that plea into a crusade. Godfrey, moved by a sense of religious duty and perhaps the promise of divine favor, sold or mortgaged much of his land to finance the journey. He was among the first noblemen to take the cross. Unlike others who saw adventure or wealth, Godfrey saw penance and pilgrimage. He gathered a host of knights, many of whom were seasoned veterans of European wars. His younger brothers, Eustace and Baldwin, also joined the cause. It would be a journey of hardship, but also one of spiritual conviction. Chapter 4. The March Begins. The First Crusade was not a single army, but a multitude of contingents: French, Norman, German, Italian. Godfrey led one of the largest and most disciplined groups. They departed from Lorraine in 1096 and journeyed across Europe toward Constantinople. Along the way, they faced hunger, disease, and skirmishes with suspicious locals. But Godfrey maintained order, forbade looting, and ensured that his men upheld the image of Christian knights. When they reached Hungary, Godfrey negotiated safe passage personally, avoiding the chaos that had accompanied previous crusading bands. Arriving in Constantinople in 1097, tensions flared between the Crusaders and the Byzantines. Emperor Alexios demanded oaths of loyalty, which Godfrey reluctantly gave, but not without distrust. His men camped outside the city, wary of betrayal. Eventually, Godfrey's troops crossed the Bosporus and stepped into the lands of the enemy, and into the pages of legend. Chapter 5. Anatolia and Antioch. Crossing into Asia Minor, the Crusaders fought brutal battles against the Seljuk Turks. The terrain was harsh, and the enemy swift. At Dorylaeum, the Crusaders were ambushed, but Godfrey held his line until reinforcements arrived. The march through Anatolia was slow and costly. Disease and thirst decimated the ranks. Still, they pushed onward, driven by a promise of salvation and the will of commanders like Godfrey. The siege of Antioch in 1097 to 1098 was a turning point. It lasted months, with starvation setting in. Godfrey fought bravely, even when morale broke. The city was eventually taken through treachery and persistence, but the Crusaders themselves were soon besieged inside it. Then came the discovery of the Holy Lance, believed to be the spear that pierced Christ. Though likely a fabrication, it reignited the Crusaders' spirits. During the breakout assault, Godfrey rallied knights and commoners alike. They charged the enemy lines with such fervor that the besieging army fled. Victory came at a terrible cost, and many began to question whether Jerusalem itself was worth the suffering. Chapter 6. Jerusalem beckons. After Antioch, the road to Jerusalem lay open. The march through Syria and Palestine was grueling under the summer sun. Godfrey's contingent dwindled in numbers, but not in resolve. By June 1099, the Crusaders stood before the walls of Jerusalem. The city was heavily fortified and defended by the Fatimids. The siege was desperate. Water was scarce and food scarcer. Godfrey ordered siege towers built from dismantled ships and palm trees. During the final assault on July 15th, his forces breached the northern wall. He climbed a ladder under heavy fire, leading the charge himself. Though the aftermath was tragically bloody, Godfrey himself avoided the excesses of his peers. He sought the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and prayed. Chapter 7. The Protector, not the King. After Jerusalem fell, the Crusaders offered Godfrey the crown of the newly formed Kingdom of Jerusalem, but he refused to wear a crown in the city, where Christ had worn a crown of thorns. Instead, he took the title Advocate of the Holy Sepulchre, a humble protector rather than a monarch. He focused on fortifying the city and defending it against counterattacks. He established fair governance, working with local Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities. His reputation for justice spread quickly. Godfrey also maintained correspondence with European rulers, urging more aid to sustain the fragile Crusader presence. When the Fatimids regrouped and launched a counteroffensive at Ascalon, Godfrey once again took to the field. The Crusaders won, though they failed to capture the city. Godfrey's strength in battle and restraint in victory became hallmarks of his brief reign. Chapter 8. A Quiet End. Godfrey's time as ruler was short. In July 1100, barely a year after Jerusalem's capture, he died, likely of illness. Some said he was poisoned. Others believed the weariness of constant warfare took its toll. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the very place he had fought so hard to free. His brother Baldwin would take the crown he had declined, becoming the first official king of Jerusalem. But Godfrey remained the Crusader most admired for his blend of martial strength and spiritual humility. His death marked the end of the First Crusade's idealism and the beginning of political complexities in the Holy Land. Chapter 9. The Memory and the Myth. In the centuries that followed, legends grew around Godfrey. Some claimed he was one of the 9 Worthies, a group of idealized heroes that included King Arthur and Charlemagne. In medieval romances and songs, he was a noble giant, undefeatable in battle, and pure of heart. Though the reality was more nuanced, his legacy inspired knights, kings, and pilgrims for generations. In Jerusalem, his tomb became a site of reverence. In Europe, his name was invoked as an example of righteous chivalry. Writers as late as the 19th century depicted him as the ideal Christian knight. He appeared in operas, novels, and paintings, his image tied to virtue and divine mission. Even during the Enlightenment, when crusading fervor was looked upon with skepticism, Godfrey was viewed as a man who transcended the violence of his age. Conclusion. The Crusader who refused the crown. Godfrey of Bouillon was a man who balanced the sword with the cross, power with humility. He lived in a time of fanaticism, yet remained measured. He conquered Jerusalem, yet rejected kingship. His life reminds us that true leadership lies not in dominion, but in service. As we drift into sleep, may we remember that history is not only made by those who take power, but by those who choose responsibility instead. In the quiet of the Holy Sepulchre, Godfrey rests, not as a king but as a protector.